Some are calling it the Biden bump.
Already,
Really?
yeah.
Really?
It's
Wait.
all because of Biden's Super Tuesday win.
Yeah, it sounds like something Paul Krugman might say, but this is from the same people who, decry President Trump taking credit for the run of the bull market up until the outbreak of the coronavirus. I mean, it's just politics. It's just comical. It really is. I mean, I just have to go back to some of the Bidenisms from the last 2 days. Even though he had such a big night last night, resuscitated his campaign to the point where it's clearly advantage Biden. Bernie flailing, Bloomberg all but out. Yesterday, Biden saying this upon taking the stage in L.A. with wife and sister and wife.
Yeah,
Who can
sister.
remember?
They don't call Super Tuesday for nothing. By the way, this is my little sister Valerie, and I'm Jill's husband. Oh no, you switched on me. This is my wife. This is my sister. They switched on me.
Inspires a lot of confidence. Clearly part of the Biden bounce. Also, could you drop the "I'm Jill's husband"
Yeah,
routine?
it's not
You know what that is?
patronizing.
It really is.
Come
I
on,
just-
women, vote for me.
I just, politicians, just more comedy. The folly is endless. For more on last night's results and the trajectory of the race, pleased to be joined again by Andy Kroll, who's the D.C. bureau chief for Rolling Stone. Andy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great to be back.
So you penned a piece for Rolling Stone in advance of Super Tuesday, talking about how the turnout, the energy within the Democrat ranks hadn't lived up to, say, 2008 levels up in the first few states, the early states, state primaries and caucuses. Last night, a little bit more juice there, a little bit more energy. Are you more sanguine about Democrat chances after what you saw last night?
I think it's a mixed bag. And I want to start by putting out there that comparisons of turnout in the primaries this year to 2016 aren't a particularly useful exercise because 2016 was, an anomalous year in a lot of ways and also didn't end that well for the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. So if you're a Democrat, you really want to look toward 2008, that, historic battle between Obama and Clinton, which saw just astronomical record-setting turnout around the country. Going into Super Tuesday, the numbers weren't great for Democrats. They were not meeting those 2008 numbers. They were behind in some cases and about even in some cases, and then, certainly trailing when you account for the fact that some of these states have grown. South Carolina's grown 20% since 2008. The numbers look a little bit better last night. Virginia obviously had a huge turnout, which in a lot of ways speaks to an Obama-aligned frontrunner, Joe Biden in this case, surging, being on the ballot, and all of these Democratic establishment figures lining up behind him. You saw pretty good turnout, not record-breaking in Texas. California, it's going to take a while to know. So I think it's a mixed picture at this point. It is not yet the 2008 surge that I think Democrats, they're really going to need in November in the general election if they're going to beat Trump and his highly motivated base of voters.
Although Rachel Bitecofer, she who's election modeler and poli-sci, made a bit of a name for herself at the Niskanen Center after her predictions that the midterm elections were pretty close to spot on. She makes the point that this idea that high turnout helps Democrats, low turnout helps Republicans is a bit of a myth. It really depends on the composition of that turnout. For example, she points to a Knight Foundation study that finds that universal participation would benefit the GOP in many swing states. In Virginia, for example, which I wouldn't call a swing state, but she does for the purposes of illustration. In Virginia, 35% of non-voters would vote for Trump, 31% would vote for Democrat. In Arizona, 34% would vote for Trump, and only 25% would choose a Democrat. The same advantage in Florida among non-voters. So, high turnout for Democrats doesn't necessarily translate into victory.
No, just saying high turnout equals Democrats win is a misnomer. Rachel Bittercoffer, who you just cited, would know that better than anyone. She's absolutely right. But the point is, low turnout for Democrats is a disaster because those non-voters or voters who don't turn up in primaries that you cited or that she cited in those different states, they're going to turn out in November for President Trump. They are going to be mobilized. The president and his allies are running, a what's likely to be $1 billion voter mobilization campaign. They've got all year to do it. They don't have any competition in a serious way in the primaries. They can focus on finding all those non-voters, identifying them, figuring out what matters to them, what makes them tick, and turning them out. So it's important to say that high turnout doesn't de facto mean Democrats win, but they're absolutely toast without it.
Now, a few hours ago, you tweeted out about Michael Bloomberg, his future, and that it's vague. Can you explain? Andy? Hello?
Say that again. Sorry.
Oh, did you tweet? You tweeted out about Michael Bloomberg and about his his future in the race.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a big question today, is what Michael Bloomberg does. I have to say it was kind of a wonderfully ironic moment last night. He took the stage in West Palm Beach at his Super Tuesday rally and said that his campaign had done something no other campaign had done. And in a way, he's right. Spend $500 million and win, I think, like 4 or 5 delegates, win one territory, American Samoa. I mean, he's right. No candidate in political history in America has done that before, but I don't think it's the kind of footnote in history that Michael Bloomberg was hoping to create. Bloomberg got into the race as the moderate alternative to Biden. He got in thinking that Biden was weakened by whether it's the Ukraine stuff or just being a pretty feeble candidate, as that audio clip you played earlier illustrated, and many other clips have illustrated. That doesn't seem to be the case now. Biden has managed to get the Democratic establishment behind him. He won Texas, which is a huge accomplishment for him. And again, I think a testament as much to Democratic voters making a late-breaking decision about who they think can beat Trump than anything Joe Biden has particularly done on the campaign trail. So Bloomberg's reason for being in the race seems to be evaporating before his eyes right now. And he's got to make a decision about whether he's going to stay in to maybe the next March 10 round or whether he gets out. What happens to his political machine that he's built in all these states? Does it go to Biden? Does it just go away? I think there's a lot to know and a lot to be decided this week in the Bloomberg camp.
Yeah, I mean, he's $12 million in TV ads in Michigan, so, maybe you let it run its course for another week and see if, again, he can find a way to ignite his campaign, although it's difficult to see exactly how that would transpire. I wonder what you think, the big question, obviously, for Republicans is, who is the better matchup for Trump? In other words, who's the weaker candidate? And there are competing arguments, Bernie versus Biden. How do you assess the matchup, the potential matchups, Biden versus Trump versus Bernie versus Trump?
The way it looks right now, it is so easy to see two equally successful and problematic scenarios, whether it's a Biden nomination or a Sanders nomination. I don't mean to equivocate on the question, but it's easy to see a Sanders nomination that galvanizes young people, Latino voters, voters of color in a way that Barack Obama did in 2008. It's very easy to see Joe Biden replicating the kind of outpouring of support Democrats got in the 2018 midterms when you saw suburban women voters who were maybe moderate Republicans or independents who maybe voted for the president in 2016 but felt put off by the first 2 years of the administration, going for Joe Biden in 2020. But at the same time, I hear just today a lot of more liberal folks out there who voted for Sanders, who voted for Warren, feeling like they're back in that place again of a voting for someone on the Democratic side that doesn't inspire them and doesn't excite them and doesn't really, get them out of bed in the morning. They're just going to cast their ballot to vote against Donald Trump. I at this stage in the race, and I could eat my words, who knows, I do think that Joe Biden is a stronger candidate because I think a lot of those Warren Sanders voters, especially the Warren ones, however many of them there really are, still feel energized by voting against the president. And that's what we saw in 2018. As much as that was a vote for these Democratic candidates around the country, it was a referendum of sorts on the first 2 years of the president. And I think you'll see a lot of liberal progressive voters say, I don't love Joe Biden, but my enthusiasm or my motivation to vote against the president will lead me to vote for Joe Biden. You'll lose some Sanders people along the way, but I do think Biden has that in his favor, and we've seen it in among parts of the African American voting electorate. We've seen it across the South. We saw it in a way in Texas. I do think that plays into his hands. I want to see what Michigan does next week. I want to see what Wisconsin does a little bit later in this primary cycle, but for now, that's kind of how I separate out those two front runners.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing about Bernie. It seems to me that he's on the clock to make amends with Elizabeth Warren over that ridiculous dinner flap and try and bring her in the fold and consolidate, the socialist element of the party and do it before Michigan. So he wins Michigan. He can maybe win Illinois and some of these other states down the road in March, because he clearly can't do it by himself. And he's only right now, according to CNN's count, about 61 delegates behind Joe Biden for all the hoopla regarding Biden's comeback yesterday. It's hardly an insurmountable lead, but it's a significant lead in elections that are proportional. You don't have a lot of opportunities to have a net 60 delegate pickup in a single state. So you're going to have to put some, you're going to have to string together some W's, as it were. And it just seems to me that Bernie's going to have a difficult time doing that with where the race is now without changing up the dynamic. And the best way to change up that dynamic is to try and get Elizabeth Warren in his fold.
It's the most obvious thing Sanders could do right now to inject his campaign with a jolt of energy would be for Elizabeth Warren to drop out of the race and endorse him and say, we are fusing our liberal progressive campaigns together, and to try to get all of those Warren voters out there to split for Sanders. Though, to be clear, if you look at the voting data, Warren voters, their second choice is not, necessarily always Sanders.
Right.
Those voters have gone in other places, including to Joe Biden. But an endorsement from her would be big. I mean, we see the power of endorsements with Joe Biden surge in the last few days. There's a school of thought that endorsements are antiquated. They don't mean anything in the age of social media. But look at this week. I mean, voters are uncertain. They are, on the Democratic side, are uncertain, afraid, and looking for every single data point they possibly can to help make their decision the moment before they walk into the voting booth. And I think that's why you saw such a break for Joe Biden, especially in a place like Texas, going into Super Tuesday, is that you had this flood of endorsements and this flood of sort of Democratic Party support getting in behind Joe Biden. And he saw a lot of voters out there say, I just saw Jim Clyburn in South Carolina endorse Joe Biden. I'm going to vote for him in the South Carolina primary. Or I just saw all of these Democratic congressmen, former senators, former governors, et cetera, endorse Biden. So we're going with him. Sanders needs something like that. He needs, not only that, he needs that progressive lane essentially to himself at this point. I mean, this is a progressive flank versus moderate flank nomination fight at this point. And there are front runners in each, and there are secondary runners in each, Warren being on the left and Bloomberg being on the moderate side. And Biden and Sanders need those two to either get out and or get behind them if they really want to sew this thing up and try to avert a brokered convention in Milwaukee. So.
He is Andy Kroll, the Washington, D.C. bureau chief for Rolling Stone magazine. Andy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Thanks.
Take care.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You've made the switch, and it feels so good. You've switched to Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The following is a paid political announcement.
In 2020, we will decide the direction of our nation for